Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. This week's guest is Deacon Lou Aaron, who is a chef, clearly a deacon based on the name, and also, I guess specifically as it relates to being a chef, there is, and we're going to have him get into it, but there's something so beautiful about the passion for good food, making good things, the beauty behind that, and also the beauty of the faith. But with that, Deacon Lou, first of all, thank you for being on the show. It's an honor to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's an honor for me to be here. I appreciate it. That's what the faith is all about, is about sharing. And a lot of people don't realize that in order to grow in faith, you need to hear other people's stories, and so you can relate and grow in your own faith. And it's really enjoyable to share your faith. Don't be afraid to share your faith.
That I appreciate that very much. I've said that on a few episodes. Then a lot of people now have said, I'm not interesting. What would happen to me was not interesting. And I said, well, there are people currently on the path to Catholicism, and they would say the exact same thing. But if they find someone that has a similar quality or some parallel story, I obviously believe in the impact of that. With your journey, I believe, in fact, I know, just like me, you were raised Catholic, and then at some point, walked away. Maybe, Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. I just walked away. There was nothing that the Catholic Church did to me, or something bad happened. None of that happened. I was raised Catholic, altar boy, 12 years of Catholic school, good family, good Catholic family. And I just became part of the world. That's a common theme with cradle Catholics, is that we really didn't learn our faith. And, the foundation was there. And eventually that's what brought me back. I think that had a lot to do with it, because, we take stuff for granted so easily in our lives that we don't appreciate it. And I think growing up Catholic and the tradition and the rituals and all that stuff that I just took for granted, deep down there was a burning in my heart all through those years of darkness that I went, that I need to come back home. And if I hadn't had that, obviously God calls each one of us, but I chose to live in the world for about 20 years. And, the Holy Spirit came back and yanked me out of that darkness I was in. And I left the church in 1980 when I graduated. I went to Bishop Kelly High School here in Boise, and I had a yearning for cooking early on. I got a job at a restaurant downtown when I was 14 years old, and I just worked the summer because I was a freshman in high school. So I just worked the summer as a dishwasher, but I saw all the chefs and the cooks in the kitchen and thought, boy, that looks pretty cool. So the next summer I went back again, and the chef, said that you're a great dishwasher. I mean, you're really good. It's very organized, and he loved how I left the dish area, because the dish area is kind of a dirty area. You get pots and pans, and I was just sludging away back there, and I took pride in what I was doing. So he saw that, so he yanked me out of the dish room and put me in the kitchen, in the pantry area. Well, after about a week in the pantry area, and about a week after cutting my hands up because I had to cut crab legs every night at this restaurant, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I would go home with just cuts all over my hand. I begged the chef to put me back in the dish room, because I was like, I don't want to do this. This sucks. But he said, no, you just be patient. So he put me in the pantry, and then I mastered that. And then he put me in saute station, then he put me in broiler, and then he put me in the bakery, and then he put me as a breakfast cook. So he moved me around every area in the kitchen. So I really just fell in love with cooking before I was even 17 years old. And I said, oh, this is what I want to do. So he made me a chef's apprentice. And I went through, it's a 4-year national program, apprenticeship program for chefs, but it took me 5 years because I traveled. But in the process, I fell in love with cooking. I also fell in love with alcohol, because in the restaurant business, you're around alcohol all the time. And, you get off work, you go right to the bar and you start drinking. Well, I was underage. I mean, I looked mature for my age, but but the cooks, slid me drinks. I remember the very first time I got drunk, I think I was 14 or 15. The cook at night handed me over a Kahlua and coffee, and I didn't even realize it was alcohol in it. And I just got totally drunk off of it. And, it was like, wow, this is a whole new world for me. And from that point on, I just started drinking. And that's part of the big reason why I left the church, is because I was living in two different worlds. And I really became a hardcore drinker through my 20s.
It makes me think of, didn't Anthony Bourdain write, and it was the biggest seller, Kitchen Confidential, I believe.
Yeah.
I didn't read it, but if I remember correctly, it was detailing with that lifestyle, what comes from the kitchen. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you know about that.
Oh yeah, no, it does. It definitely does. I mean, it revolves around drinking. I mean, you ask anybody who's worked in a kitchen, that's what it is. I mean, you get off work, you've worked a hard shift, and you go have a couple beers, and then those couple beers for me turned into a case of beer, and we'd be up all night drinking. And I remember many a times where I fell asleep on a butcher block table in the kitchen at this restaurant we worked at, because I got so drunk that I just went back in the kitchen because I had to open for breakfast the next morning. So
Wow.
I'd get drunk until
so
like
it was
3
more
o'clock.
Convenient to just stay there and wake up and then start the next shift. Yeah.
And I got really good at it because I had a natural ability to cook. I mean, I remember, people say words don't mean too much, but they mean a lot, and they form you as you go through your life. And I remember the chef when I was 17 saying, Lou, in this business, you either got it or you don't got it, and you got it. And that really pumped me up, like, okay, well, I got it. So, it prompted me to pursue cooking. So I did that and became a certified chef when I was 22, 23. And I traveled all over the place. I went to Georgia, I went to Texas, I went to Colorado. I worked for some top chefs. I worked for Wolfgang Puck and Aspen, but it wasn't my lifestyle. I mean, I was an alcoholic, but they were into drugs in Aspen. I mean, Aspen was all drugs. And I was like, this is crazy. I didn't last.
It was up a notch from.
Yeah, it was the rich man's, altered mind game. Yeah, I couldn't do it because I really never got into drugs. I you experiment with once or twice, like, okay, this isn't for me. But I mean, alcohol is a drug, so that was my choice. So, but I didn't last very long in Aspen. So I spent 3 or 4 years in Texas, and I could hide my drinking because I could cook really well. So I could hide it. I could drink all day long, and I was a pretty happy drunk. So I did fine. But there came a time, probably 1984, 1985, where it was the same cycle. As you drink, you get up and you start drinking, and you drink all day, and then you go to bed and you get back up and you do it again. It's a vicious cycle. And I started praying. I never left God. I never not believed in God. I always believed in God. And I talked to God a lot every night, probably for 10 years, every single night. I would go to bed, I'd get in bed, and I'd say, Lord, please let me stop drinking. And the very next morning I wake up, and the first thing I did was start drinking. I worked in a restaurant in the 80s that had the hard liquor on a gun, on a little shot. It wasn't in bottles. They were in guns on the fountain. It was like a fountain drink. So I go pour myself a 7 and 7 at 7 in the morning and just be on my way. But I never forgot that. And I also had this very significant dream through the 1980s, and it happened probably dozens of times, where I would be in this really dark room, and it was just pressure packed, like it was going to blow up. It was just pure black, dark. And there was an incredibly bright light underneath the crack of the door. And I could see the door swelling, and it was like this bright light was trying to get in. And in my warped mind, I thought it was the devil trying to get in. I mean, but there I was living the life of the devil in darkness. And my stupidity was obviously God wanting to get into my life, and I wouldn't let it. And that dream kind of scared me a little bit, because God was telling me, you need to quit living this way. And I wasn't. So in the meantime, I met my wife in 1985. I was chef down at Top of the Hoff restaurant downtown in Boise. And it was was a nice restaurant, top floor. And my wife moved here from Eugene, Oregon. She was a hostess, and I was an arrogant chef, and she hated my guts, but eventually I charmed her over, and we got married in 1987. But the problem is that she married a drunk. She didn't realize it. I mean, I was hiding it from her. I was drinking every single day, and she didn't know it. And any alcoholic you talk to will tell you there's an enabler. And I didn't really know what that meant until after I quit drinking, but she was enabling me because she was in denial that I was an alcoholic. But I would drink every single day. So on April 26, 1993, I came home drunk, and my wife was sitting there on the couch looking at me, and she says, "Lou, what are all those beer cans doing behind the fridge?" And we had a fridge out in the garage that had a cubby hole behind it. And what I would do is I would get drunk, come home, sit in the living room, be watching TV or whatever. And I would just get up, walk out into the garage. I could chug a beer in about 3 seconds. And I would put the beer can behind the fridge in the cubby hole. I'd just throw it back there. Well, after 3 or 4 years, the cubby hole filled up, and I wasn't paying attention to it. There was probably 300 or 400 or 500 beer cans back there. I had no idea. And she was back there in the garage one day, and she just saw it was full of beer cans back there. And that's what she looked at me. She goes, "What are all those beer cans doing behind the fridge?" And then the Holy Spirit just took me over, because I wasn't in any conversation about saying, "Oh, I'm an alcoholic," or "I got a drinking problem." We never had that discussion. And the Holy Spirit just took me over and just said, I looked at her and I said, "I'm alcoholic." And she said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Yes, I am." And I sat her down and I just laid everything out what I'd been doing. I'd drinking a case of beer a day. I would be on Long Island iced teas by noon. It was bad. And she was shocked. And so from that day forward, I went to work the next day at the restaurant I worked at, and I told everybody, I said, I'm done drinking. And they just laughed at me like, "Yeah, right, you're done drinking." And when you're drinking that much, you would expect withdrawals and
Sure.
You get a plan to go to AA meetings and all that stuff. I never had one withdrawal symptom, nothing. It was like the Lord answered my prayer finally and just took it all away. I never went to one AA meeting, and I haven't had a drink since April 26, 1993.
That's
And it's totally God taking me over and just saying, "You're done. This is it." And it was just off that one prompting from my wife. And it was obviously the Holy Spirit doing that. And so my wife had married a drunk. So for the next 6 months, we went through pure hell, because she didn't know who I was, and I didn't really know who she was. And we'd been married 5 years and had 2 kids already. I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. And it was really hard for 6 months. And you don't think about that when you quit drinking, but it was really hard adjusting, because I was a completely different person. But we made it through, and we obviously we were better for it. There was some trust issues with my wife after she had found out what I'd been doing, that there was obviously some things that she thought, there's certain smells associated with alcoholism that you associate with, or just through your life, you smell something and it reminds you of something. So I would be coming home from work or something. She'd catch a smell and she thought I'd been drinking, and we get in a big fight. And I was like, I'm not drinking. So after 3 or 4 years, that went away. But once I stopped drinking, we were very materialistic people. We just had to have all the new stuff, all the new toys. I'm a head chef, so I have to have the prestige and all this stuff. But we did start talking about going to church. I said, "Let's go to church." And my wife was not raised in any specific religion. Her family had been Seventh-day Adventists. And, they went to church once in a while, but they never practiced their faith. So my wife was really nothing. So we talked about going to church. My wife's sister's a devout Baptist. And
say that again. I didn't catch that.
My wife's sister is a devout Baptist.
Sister, okay,
and,
got it.
Yeah, and they were going to a church every Sunday, and my wife, was like, wanted to be a part of that. So she kept saying, "Well, let's go to church. Let's go to church." Well, we talked about it for 3 years, going to church. And November 5th, 1996, the Holy Spirit took over for us, came and burned our house down. We lost everything. We lost everything. We lost our pets, our car. I mean, everything. We lost everything. We had a wood burning stove, like fireplace.
Yeah.
And we hadn't had a fire in a week. And my wife would take the the ashes out of to clean the fireplace out. And when we'd wait a week or two before we took them out, but she put them in a bag, put them out, and we had a little gravel pit away from the house that she would go sit them in to make sure that it would be okay. Well, my 6-year-old daughter was sick that day. She was in the house, and my wife went to take the ashes out, and she heard my daughter scream in the house. So she put the ashes down, went back in the house and forgot about the ashes. And the ashes were 6 feet away from the garage. Well, 6 hours later, caught the whole house on fire. So I would say, make sure your ashes are out. But that was a tragedy. I mean, it was incredibly hard on our family. We were, we got our house rebuilt. For 6 months. We were displaced. We were in different rental apartments, and my kids would have nightmares every night about the fire. And I wasn't at home when it happened, but the firemen said that they had like 2 minutes to get out of the house or they would have blown up. It was a backdraft going on with the doors. And so they were very lucky. But it really, we look back at that moment of our life as it was so terrible, but it was the best thing that could have ever happened to us, because we lost everything. We lost all those material goods. We lost all that stuff, but we still had our family. And we realized that this is a wake-up call for us. And so my wife said, we're going to church. And I said, yeah, let's go to church. Well, I didn't know the difference between churches. I was raised Catholic. I thought everything was Catholic. I thought it was like everybody does the same thing. I had no idea there was difference in the churches.
Yep.
So we go check out the Baptist church. We go to a Baptist church and we walk in there, and I was in a foreign nation. I thought, I was like, what is going on in here? There was a 45-minute sermon, and there was karaoke thing up on the wall with reading the string and the words, and we were singing, and then there was a plea for money. I mean, he'd be in the middle of talking, and he'd start praying for a new car for the youth group or whatever. And
Sure.
and at the end there was we call it an altar call. There was obviously no altar up there, but they call it altar call and asked us all to come up and give our hearts to Jesus. And I didn't feel right. And we went 2 or 3 times, and I said, this just doesn't feel right. And she goes, well, you were raised Catholic. Let's go to Catholic church. I said, okay. Because she didn't really know there was any difference either. So we started coming to Our Lady of the Rosary here in Boise, and the church itself, the sanctuary hadn't been built. So they were having mass in the parish hall. But the very first mass we went to, we were walking out, and my wife says, I just felt like I was at home. And I went, oh. I said, good. I said, that sounds good. Well, we'll start coming here. So for the next 3 or 4 months, we were going every Sunday. I was not receiving communion, although there started to be a burning in my heart of wanting to receive communion. I know I had to go to confession, but I was scared to death to go to confession. I wasn't even on my radar. I was just, well, we're just going to come. And all this time, my wife was saying, I don't mind coming to church here, but I'm not becoming Catholic. I said, well, that's fine. You don't have to become Catholic. I wasn't forcing her. Well, we go 3 or 4 months, and then her parents caught wind that we were going to Catholic church, and it unleashed a torrent of questions and concerns with her family about our path to Catholicism. And
They were still practicing Adventists. They were not. Okay.
No, they were not practicing Adventists, but they had been trained. They were, they were in their 60s, so they knew what the Adventists believe. And the Adventists, we had to have a family meeting at their house one night. I'll never forget it as long as I live. They were taught that the Catholic Church takes the kids away when they're 13 years old and takes them away from the family. The Pope is the Antichrist, the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, all this stuff. And I was like, what? And I had no idea what they were talking about. I was like, what are you talking about? I was raised Catholic, and, they didn't come take me away when I was 13. So we kind of quelled some of those fears, but they still were very anti-Catholic. I mean, incredibly. My mother-in-law looked at me. She said, if I knew that you were going to become Catholic, I would have never let you marry my daughter.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow. I was shocked. I had no idea somebody could hate something that bad. But over the years, it went away. I'll tell you later about what the relationship with them. But the day before RCIA started, my wife came up to me and says, I think I want to go to RCIA. I went, oh, okay, that sounds good. And so I said, I'll go with you. So we started going to RCIA. And that was really the springboard for me, because I started learning about Catholicism that I'd never experienced before. And the other springboard for me was my wife's sister. She started questioning me on everything. Why do you call your priest father? Why do you guys pray to statues? What's purgatory? All these questions. I had no idea at all what she was talking about, because I'd never been challenged before, because I was raised in a Catholic environment with Catholic school and all that stuff. So
there'd be no reason. Yeah, exactly.
No, Zippo. No. So she started drilling me, and I was pretty embarrassed. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. Let me get back to you. so I thought, I said, heck, I got to go buy a Bible. So because Baptists are big Bible believers. So I kept hearing that, and she had given me this little tract called the Romans Road, and it was just a little paper pamphlet. It was all on Book of Romans and how you get saved. Okay. And I thought, and it made sense to me. I'm looking at it, go, that looks good, looks pretty good, looks pretty simple to me. And but I knew it was too easy. So I went and bought a Bible. And then, so my mom had been praying for, 15, 20 years for me, like St. Monica, to come back to the church. So I called my mom right away and I said, hey, Mom, I went and bought a Bible. And she says, wow. She goes, well, what Bible did you get? And I opened up the cover and it said, Authorized King James Version. And she said, you bought a Protestant Bible? What do you do that for? And I said, was there a difference? I said, what's the difference? I said, it's a pretty Bible. It was a nice, big, hardbound Bible. And
good price. Yeah.
Yeah. And it, I still have that Bible, and it's brand new still. I haven't really opened it. I realized that it was a Protestant Bible. So I went and bought a Catholic Bible, and I just started to become, I love the term Scott Hahn used. He said it, 25 years ago, but he said he's a Bible junkie, and that's what I became. I became a Bible junkie. I started I was reading it every day. It was interfering with our marriage, because my wife was like, what are you doing? I just was in the Bible every single day, because I was getting challenged and I was finding answers. And it was very exciting to me. Someone questioned me on purgatory or priest father and all this stuff. And it was right at the beginning of the internet. So I didn't have a lot of internet in 1997. It was there, but it wasn't like it is today. So I went and started buying every book in the world, and I bought books on every single religion. I bought Episcopalians, Methodists, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Presbyterians, Lutherans. I bought everything. I bought Luther. I bought all of Luther's works. I bought Joseph Smith's book. So I started devouring it, trying to learn, and everything was pointing me back to the Catholic Church, because I was, I was realizing there was a big difference in religions, and Catholics worship differently than everybody else. And it hit me front and center. So, and that's why I love the Bible, because it was giving me all these answers. And it also stemmed a new belief in Jesus that I never experienced before. When you read the God, because I started reading the Bible. A lot of people, when you read the Bible, you say, okay, I'm going to sit down and read the Bible, and they begin in Genesis and they start reading it and they get lost. And that's what I did. I started reading Genesis, and then by the time I got to Leviticus, I was like, I don't understand anything that's going on here. So luckily my sister said, well, Scott Hahn and Jeff Cavins put out this new thing called, I don't remember what it's called now. That was their first Bible study back in they put it out in like 93 or 94, but it was a video on EWTN video series that we bought, and I went through and that really helped me a lot, because how Scott Hahn talks about covenants and really made the Bible in perspective to me, and the chronological order is such a huge deal. So I read the historical books first, and that put everything into context to me of how the Jews put their scriptures together and why it wasn't in chronological order, is that they put their books in importance of the prophet. This person's importance, so we're going to put it first. And
yep.
So that helped me out a lot. And so in the footnotes in the Bible, I didn't know idea what footnotes were, and I started reading the New Testament and learning about Jesus, or when Jesus said something, or when Paul quoted the Old Testament, I'd go back and I'd get the context of what he's talking about. And it just exploded my brain, and it was a lot of fun. It was a great adventure, like the Bible study was called. So I got on that path, and going through RCIA, my wife continually said, I'm not becoming Catholic. And then by the third scrutiny, she looks at me and says, I want to become Catholic. So that caused more rifts in our family, but she was going through with it because she fell in love with the Catholic faith too. And so on Easter Vigil 1998, she got baptized and confirmed. My kids got baptized and confirmed. Beautiful. And we got our marriage blessed in the church. We had like the grand slam on Easter Vigil 1998. It was just fantastic. And
that's great. That's a great way to put it. The grand slam on the.
Well, it was like, wow, this is like it, everything. And we were so happy. But her parents were there at Mass that night. And that was the first time they'd ever stepped foot in the Catholic Church. And the pain on their face, I'll never forget the pain on their face. It was, the rituals and all the stuff they were, and that was like the highest Mass you can go to, Easter Vigil. For their first Mass. So her mom was crying through the entire Mass. It was, and she wasn't tears of joy. She was worried. And so the next few years I calmed her down. And I had a relationship with her mom. Her mom had a debilitating disease that she got when she was 40. And her mom passed away a couple years ago, but I would always say to her, I said, Donna, I'm saying Hail Mary for you. And it became a joke within the family that she'd always, when she'd have a health issue, she'd call me or she'd go, you need to start praying to Mary for me because I need some help. So it wore off a little bit. And, and I had talks with her dad and he said he had friends through his life that were Catholic. And he said that to him, the Catholic Church made logical sense. So I thought, okay, well, he's coming around the corner a little bit. So that relationship mellowed out. Her sister, it never really mellowed out. We just quit talking about it because she's set in her beliefs and I wasn't proselytizing her. Anytime someone would ask me a question, I would answer it. And we have a really good relationship now and we're good. Yeah. I remember when we got through Easter Vigil and everything, my hunger for the scriptures brought me to start challenging Protestant pastors because I had some people at my work, at my restaurant that that were pretty strong Protestants, and we'd get in arguments or debates at work and they would go to their pastors, and all of a sudden I get an email or a phone call from one of these pastors around Boise, and they started asking me questions. And so I just started getting into debates with them. I was probably carrying on 6 or 7 debates with these pastors in Boise for probably 6 or 7 months. And they were nasty debates. And I still have every one of them. We were exchanging email back and forth. And I look back at that, I thought it didn't produce any fruit at all, arguing with somebody. It just never, it was like, I'm proving my point and they're proving their point to me. It just never, it did help me fine tune and help me learn my faith a lot better. But I look back at that and I was a jerk. It was basically, I was being a jerk to these people and they were being a jerk back to me. And I didn't change their mind. And I still go back and I check up on these guys. And this was 20 something years ago, 23, 24 years ago. I look back and see where they are today. Some of them have completely left their faith completely. They're just wandering. Because, on the internet, you can find people. So I go back and look at these 7 or 8 guys that I was debating with, and some of them, 2 of them were ex-Catholic. And, as you probably know, ex-Catholics are the biggest anti-Catholics out there.
Absolutely. That on YouTube, video after video, someone will say, where are they from? And they'll say they were Catholic and now they're trying to preach against what they understood the Catholic faith to be. So yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's 2 in specific that were in Boise, and they went and planted I like this church planting. They it kind of rubs me the wrong way. They say I go planted a church. Sure. But they traveled around the Northwest planting churches, and every one of them has failed. And I look at them and I'm thinking, I pray for them every day that they would come home, because they're searching and it's right there in front of their face and they don't see it. And I've gone through my life now looking at where God has put me. And, in 1997, before the fire, in 1986, before the fire, you'd have paid me $1 million to tell me that I would be a deacon in the Catholic Church in 2021. it would have never, it was not even on the, nothing. There was no way, nothing. So I started getting involved with RCIA. Obviously I went through RCIA, so I started teaching RCIA.
Oh, wow. Okay.
On the Bible. I just, obviously people could see that I love the Bible. So because I was talking about it all the time. And I remember an encyclical that St. John Paul II, it was like 1991. I do not remember the name of the encyclical, but a quote stuck with me. And he basically said that the day that Catholics can quote scripture in their normal conversation with people, the world will change. We will change the world if we can just talk to people biblically without them even realizing it in the language of the Bible. And I do that now. And I did that. I started doing that back then. I own a couple businesses. So I have employee meetings once a month, and they're Bible studies. That's what they are. But my employees don't know that. They don't know it's a Bible study. I'm great into entomology. So I'll pick a word and then we'll go down a path, and pretty much guaranteed over the last 20 something years at our employee meetings, there's employees in there sobbing and crying throughout the meeting. And we talk business and I go over profit and loss statements and all that stuff, but the key message is always a word that I'll just give you one example is character. Character is a big deal, and character is being watered down to nothing in our world today. So I'll pick character, and I put the word up and I'll ask them, what does this word mean? And they'll say, well, it's your qualities or these words. So I'll break it down, and the word character actually came from it's a Norse word, and it's an engraver's tool. It's where you would engrave, and it would be permanent mark. So your character is your mark, it defines who you are. So I get on that path with them and tell them about that. Or teamwork, the word team. What does that word mean? We hear this, there's no I in team, but that's kind of stuff. But I broke the word down. The word team means to pull your partner up. It means to pull somebody up. So that's how I do. I pick a different word every month. And we're having one this Saturday too. And I don't know what the word is yet. The Holy Spirit gives me a word to talk. But that's how you teach people. I don't get up there and say I'm a Catholic and you need to become Catholic. I get biblical stories and I relate them in a way they can relate to it and understand it, because we live in a broken world. And I know that it's been recorded how I hire people, because, when you get on this journey back to the church and you read the scriptures, what is the gospel? And that question always asks me. I ask people all the time, what is the gospel to you? What is the gospel? And a lot of people don't understand what the gospel, what is the gospel? They don't understand what it is. Well, it's good news. Well, what is the good news? What is the good news that Jesus is trying to tell you to go preach? And a lot of people it's going to church every Sunday for an hour. That's not the good news. That is not the good news. Jesus went out and preached to the poor, to the rejected. I mean, you look at all the stories, he went to the people that were broken. And probably 2001, 2002, I started hiring broken people. I remember a guy walking into me, sitting down, and he was just distraught. And he had just gotten out of prison. Well, he had not just gotten out of prison. He'd gotten out of prison 6 months ago. And he says, no one will hire me. I cannot get a job. I'm a convicted felon. And I never asked him what he did. I just said, okay, I'll give you a shot. And he ended up working for me for almost 7 years. A great guy. Great guy. I never asked his history or whatever. So for the last 20 years, we've turned both of our West Sides. Our other West Side we opened in 2012, but we do it both ways. My son and my daughter are running the restaurants now. Because I'm working at church, but we have a philosophy that we are being Jesus to people. And that's basically how I raise my kids, is that you're put on this earth to serve other people. Yeah, it's about, WIIFM, what's in it for me, but it's not what's in it for me. That is, when you're young, you see that. And I relate it to the scriptures where Jesus grabbed Peter and, do you love me, Peter? Do you love me, Peter? Do you love me, Peter? And then he says, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and do what you wanted to do. But now that you're older, other people are going to dress you and take you where you don't want to go. And that's what really, it's like, okay, as you get older, you realize that Jesus grabs you and takes you where you don't want to go. And I can go back through you can go back through your life and see these paths. Well, I'm going to go do this. I've got this plan to go this way. and it never works out the way you planned it. It's always different. And there's a purpose for everything in your life. And that's what we train our employees. And we give these people, I don't know what the percentage is right now, but usually we're hovering around 75-80% of our employees are either felons, drug addicts, alcoholics, homeless, you name it. We've got the whole array there. So it's not one big happy family, let me tell you, because when you hire people like that, it is an extraordinarily tough. It's tough to do that because you're basically being a counselor of these people. These people are really having struggles. We got great success stories too, though. I mean, we probably 40% of our people that we hire actually make it. 60% don't, and it depends on the year, but we've had people die at our restaurant that are drug addicts that just fell off the wagon and actually died at our place. So we've seen the tragedy that drugs have, but we're helping these people, and they see that, and we are one big family. We're not so much happy all the time because that's a misnomer. It's just not real. But there's a piece about it that when you're having so many broken people in your restaurant, that we're all in it together, and that word team really to pull each other up and to help them. Pope Francis, I quote Pope Francis, where it's not so much, lending a handout to a person that's down on the ground, giving them money. So you need to pick them up and get them going. You need to help them. And that's what we do. We don't just throw money at something. We grab that person and we try to form them. I think I'm up to like 6 or 7 converts that have become Catholic since we started doing this. Then I got one great story of a 6'6", 350-pound guy, huge guy that I hired, that very devout Baptist. And he, first day of work, he comes up to me, he says, "Hey chef, I heard you're Catholic, so I don't like Catholics, so you don't talk about Catholics to me." I said, "No problem, George. I won't say anything about it." And this guy was gifted. I mean, there was a holiness about this guy, that he was a real rough guy, but there was a holiness about him that I can't really explain. So he came to me one day and said, "Hey chef, we're studying the Gospel of John at my church." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Well, when you get to chapter 6, let me know." And he said, "Okay." So he comes to me on a Monday, he says, "Well, tomorrow night we're doing John chapter 6. I said, "Okay, well, here's a list of questions to give your pastor when you when you get to it." And they're obviously Catholic questions. I mean, John chapter 6 is the chapter, right? So he came to work on Wednesday, and I said, "Well, how'd it go, George?" And he goes, "He couldn't answer one of your questions, chef. He couldn't answer one of your questions." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." So I just left it at that. I didn't say anything. And then a couple of weeks later, he came to me on Monday morning and said, "I need to go to mass with you." I said, "What? Are you kidding me? What are you talking about?" And he says, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I turned on the TV and mass was on. And it just, something told me I need to go to mass. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, that's good." Well, it was Palm Sunday week. It was Palm Sunday. So he comes to our church on Palm Sunday. And I tell you, it was just this holiness around him. It was, I can't explain it. So he sits with me and we're walking out, and this guy was going to a church that prayed and sung in tongues, and he had the gifts of the Holy Spirit. I mean, he was into it. So we walk out of Palm Sunday mass, and he looked at me and goes, "Chef," he goes, "That's how you worship." I went, "Oh, really?" I said, "Good deal." Well, he ended up going through RCIA and becoming Catholic.
Oh my God.
And he wanted to become a priest. Unfortunately, he had a heart attack and died on our property during a lunch rush. But he had
was he already received into the church by then?
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
Yep, he had already become Catholic, and he had been a Catholic about a year. And he was talking about the priesthood. He had gone, and I know he was talking to Father Camacho about the priesthood. He was down at St. Mary's talking. And this was 15 years ago. But very holy guy. He would come to our church and no one would sit with him. It was weird. He kept bugging. He would sit all over the church and no one would ever sit next to him. The pew would always be empty. And there was just a holiness about him. He couldn't figure it out. And I've heard stories about John Paul when he would in his holy chapel celebrate mass. and people would go in and they wouldn't see John Paul, but he would be face down, prostrate, and
Yes.
you could hear him groaning, the groaning. And that's the way George prayed. I mean, I would when I would go to mass, I could hear him groaning. And it was just, I'll never forget it. It gives me chills just telling you about it. Just he would be groaning. And he had gifts. I mean, this is before he became Catholic. My wife had to have an emergency hysterectomy. And I was freaked out because it was like she collapsed at work and was bleeding badly. We take her to the hospital and it says, you got to have hysterectomy tomorrow. We got to get this. It was bad. So I go to work the next morning. I had to go do some stuff in the morning, but I was stressed out. And George comes to me at 7 o'clock in the morning, hands me his piece of paper. And I open it up and give me a backdrop preview of what happened. So Padre Pio is my saint. Padre Pio, I mean, Padre Pio's come to me personally, and I've had conversations with him, and that's a whole nother story to talk to. But
we could talk for hours about that.
yeah. He's really, I mean, he's very alive, very real. But his Padre Pio's prayers: pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful. Hear your prayer. Well, I say that prayer all the time. I had said it for years. I mean, it was just part of who I was. I never told anybody that, and I certainly didn't talk to George about that. Well, he comes in that morning. He comes and hands me this piece of paper, and I open it up, and it says, "Pray, hope, and don't worry. God will hear your prayer." I went, George, where did you get this? And he says, some guy woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and told me to write it down and give it to you. And I went, holy cow! And it wasn't even in his handwriting. And I thought, man, so I was like, there's Padre Pio right there. So then I knew right then everything was going to be fine. It was like, I just got this piece about me. It's like, it's going to be fine. That's the kind of guy George was. George just had that gift. He was just in tune with he passed over the thin veil that we have around us. He was just something else. And I'll be at the West Side working, and George had a certain smell to him, and I'll be at the West Side and I get this whiff of smell of George, and it's been 15 years. I can still smell it, and it's just crazy. I'll tell you one more story on George of his ability, and this just gives you hope. And I hope your listeners or viewers understand that the communion of saints is very real. I mean, it is very real, and I sense their presence all the time. And you just have to be open to listening and being aware of what's going on. I had a bookkeeper that had worked for me, and her husband was my best friend that I had brought down to be a chef at a restaurant here. They lived up in Spokane, and I moved him down here, and I was consulting for a restaurant here in Boise, and I hired him, and great guy, great chef. And he had gotten, he got killed in a road rage accident on I-84. I was actually at a soccer game with my daughter in Nampa, and we were trying to get on the Franklin Road exit to get back on the interstate, and it was backed up for miles. So I backed up off Franklin exit, and I started going down Franklin Road, and I get a call saying John's dead. And I went, what do you mean John's dead? He goes, he got killed. And he was the cause of the interstate being broken down. It was right there at the Birds of Prey at the Meridian exit. He got rear-ended by a guy in a road rage. They'd been in a race on the interstate, taunting each other, and the guy came up behind his pickup and hit him, and he flipped out and got ejected from the truck and got killed instantly. That's another story right there. I mean, this just tells you that John had been a fallen away Catholic. I was teaching a returning Catholic class that earlier that year, where he started coming to those classes. He went to confession, started coming back to church, and he only been coming back to church 3 weeks when he got killed. So you look at stories like that. Why did that happen? Why does that happen? So I don't know why it happens, but there's a reason for all of that happening. So anyway, his wife, a couple years later, his wife went the wrong way after he died. She got into trouble, into drugs, and it had been about 7 or 8 years. She came back to me and said, can I, I've had a rough go of things. Would you hire me? And I hired her as a bookkeeper. Well, she's working for me for like 3 weeks, and she tries to kill herself. ODs on drugs. I get this weird text from her. It was all mumbled jumbled. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, Tamara. What is this? And find out that she had taken a whole bottle of pills and tried to kill herself. And she's at St. Al's. She's brain dead. There's no chance. They said she's brain dead. She's not going to make it. So they said they're going to pull the plug on her. It was like Wednesday. They're going to pull the plug on her at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, or 2 o'clock. I don't remember what time it was, 2 or 4 o'clock. So that Wednesday, I'm sitting at the West Side at my desk, and I've got some pictures. I've got a glass cover on my desk, and I got a bunch of pictures underneath my desk. Well, George was so big that he played Santa Claus at our Christmas parties. He was, he's just a big guy. He was perfect Santa Claus. So there's a picture of him dressed up as Santa right by my keyboard. So I was sitting there and I was just praying for Tamara, and I looked in and I saw George, and I just kind of chuckled. I didn't really think anything of it. It was his picture. And that was about 4 o'clock. So I knew they were pulling the plugs around 4 o'clock. And then I just went about the rest of my day. So I'm driving home about 6:30 that night. And my friend calls me and says, Did you hear? And I said, did I hear what? He goes, Tamara woke up. I went, what do you mean Tamara woke up? She goes, yes, she woke up at 4 o'clock. They pulled the plug and she woke up. And he goes, but it was strange because she sat up in bed and screamed out, George. And I was like, George, what does that mean? And it just clicked in my head that at 4 o'clock, I'm looking at George on my desk and a picture of George, right? So I think I got to find out who this George is. So the next morning I went to St. Al's and I'm talking to Tamara. I said, who's George, Tamara? And she says, George, what do you mean George? I said, yeah, when you got up yesterday, they said you screamed out George. She goes, I don't know any George. And her son was sitting there, and I said, do you guys know any George? And they said, no, we don't have any relative. We don't know anybody named George. So to me, that was a sign that George was involved with that situation somehow. Because it's the same time, 4 o'clock, and she wakes up and she's brain dead, and she's perfectly fine now. This has been 7 or 8 years ago, and she's fine now. She totally recovered. So I look at those stories of those are miracles to me, and they happen every day to us. These miracles happen every single day, and we don't pay attention to them. And I've got dozens of stories like that.
Well, like you said about some of those former pastors, you said it's right in front of them, but they don't see it. These things are happening all around. You're just hitting so many points about being able to discern. And now we can't get into, which people have that gift and which do not, whatever. But there's this ability that all of us have to just have our eyes open. So I wouldn't even put it in the realm of discerning. Just, do we pay attention and look for those things that are gifts, people that are gifts, things that are said? You covered all of that, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, yeah. It's amazing because when you get in tune with God, I remember another sermon from Pope John Paul when I don't remember what I just love St. John Paul II. I mean, his writings are just incredible, and I don't keep track of every single one I read, but sure. He had a sermon once where he said, we hear the phrase all the time to open your doors to Christ, open your heart to Christ. And he said, that's not good enough. He said, when you open your doors, you rip the doors off the hinges. Because you rip them off. And, and he was speaking in Italian. So it's just the way he said it. You rip the doors off, and then that lets Christ take you over. And that's what the gospel is. The gospel is not just going to church and listen to the readings and being a cradle Catholic, just going through the motions. I talk about that all the time. I talk about the RCIA still to this day. When I came back to the church, I didn't know why we did all this stuff. Yeah. I didn't know why we made the sign of the cross. I started asking people, because to a lot of people, our Catholic, we don't know what we're doing. And there's a reason. Every single thing we do at church has a purpose. It's the scriptures and the church just together. And I remember, I'll never forget walking in and asking Catholics, why do we make the sign of the cross? And I'd get the stupidest answers. I get meaning It's just a ritual. It doesn't mean anything. Or I would, it's a sign of your baptismal. You're renewing your baptismal coming. Yeah, that's true. But the sign of the cross is a prayer. It's not something you make in the end zone after a touchdown or after you get up to baseball and you make the sign of the cross. That's not what it is. I started reading the church fathers and seeing that people were martyred for making the sign of the cross. So I cannot make the sign of the cross anymore without getting chills. I make the sign of the cross realizing that that is the prayer of the church. That's how Christians recognized each other in the first, second, third centuries. They would make the sign of the cross in the sand. Read Tertullian, read the early church fathers of what the sign of the cross meant to them. And it puts more perspective and depth. And when you make the sign of the cross, you don't just do this and forget about it. The sign of the cross is envelopes the entire gospel, the Trinity, everything. And in the name of is an oath formula. It's an oath formula saying you are possessed by God. And that's what the gospel is. The gospel is Jesus. Read the story in the gospels about Jesus. All Jesus is doing, he gave us a model to follow. And it is him reproducing his life in us. That's the essence of the gospel, is that Jesus Christ, we live his life. And that's the purpose. And every one of us really live his life. And it's how we approach it. We suffer. We have to die. We have happiness. Jesus had all those feelings and all that stuff that we experience. And our job is to wrap our arms around that crucifix and understand that there's a meaning in our life, and it's to associate ourselves with him. He gave us the model. And when you understand that sense of suffering and that peace and that happiness that he had, because he went through all the emotions and he took on other people's issues. Fulton Sheen brought up something that if you notice, every time Jesus healed somebody, or Jesus, like when he raised Lazarus from the dead, or the hemorrhaging woman, he took on their pain. It says in the scriptures, and you don't catch it, it says he groaned, or he snorted in spirit, or he sighed, he wept. Fulton Sheen said that when Jesus healed somebody, like when he healed that hemorrhaging woman, he took on her hemorrhaging. He took on her pain. When he raised Lazarus from the dead, he took on Lazarus's death. He took it on. So it's just like in our ministry at the West Side, when we hire these people, we're suffering with these people. We're taking them on under our fold, and we're helping them understand life. And that's what life is.
And you absolutely nailed it, because a lot of employers would say things like, we don't need that burden. Right?
Exactly.
Or we don't need that potential toxicity, or we don't need, so that is fascinating. I am absolutely shocked right now. I'm going to have to listen to this again. I cannot thank you enough for everything that you just spoke about, the ministries, the fact that it's your son and daughter that are running the restaurants now.
Yep.
The fact that you're keeping that model going is admirable, to say the least. So I just want to thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, we're all called to do that. We're all called to serve. We really are.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And everyone, all the listeners, please share this. There is a lot to learn in this testimony, and I'd say these brilliant avenues that all connect to the same thing. So just think about it, ponder it, pray about this and what Deacon Lou just shared today. And thank you all for listening. Until next time, God bless. Take care.
See ya.